To the empirical evidences of the fallacy of the law of gravitation, 4 well-known difficulties of the gravitational theory can be added. A. Gravitation acts in no time. Laplace calculated that in order to keep the solar system together, the gravitational pull must propagate with a velocity at least 50 million times greater than the velocity of light. Something we've heard before. A physical agent requires time to cover distance. Gravitation defies time. B. Matter acts where it is not, or in absentia, through no physical agent. This is a defiance of space. Newton was aware of this difficulty when he wrote in a letter to Bentley that gravity should be innate, inherent, and essential to matter, so that one body can act upon another at a distance through a vacuum without the mediation of anything else, by and through which their action and force may be conveyed from one to the other, to another. It is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has in philosophical matters a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into it. Leibniz opposed the theory of gravitation for this very reason. Gravitational force is unchangeable by any and all agents or by any medium through which it passes, always propagating as the inverse square of the distances. Gravitation is entirely independent of everything that influences other natural phenomena. De Sitter. This is a defiance of the principles governing other energies. D. Every particle in the universe must be under a tendency to be pulled apart because of the infinite mass in the universe. It is pulled to all sides by all the matter in space.
Right.
So I have to scratch my head. I'm going to have to read that one a couple times. A few additional remarks about the motion of bodies in the universe, which bear upon the theory of gravitation, are added here. 1. The notion of the tangential escape or inertia of the primary motion of the planets and satellites, being adopted by all cosmogonical theories of post-Newtonian days, led all of them into insurmountable difficulties. The retrograde motion of some satellites is one of these difficulties. 2. The principle of gravitation demands an ultimate balling of all matter in the cosmos. This is not in harmony with spectral observations, which suggest even an expanding universe. An atom differs from the solar system by the fact that it is not gravitation that makes the electrons go around the nucleus, but electricity. B. Russell. Different principles are supposed to govern the motion of the planetary bodies in the macrocosm and microcosm.
There are no islands in space.
Newton explained the principle underlying the motion of the planets and the satellites by the example of a stone thrown horizontally from a mountain with such force that gravitation bends its flight so that it revolves around the earth, coming back to exactly the same place once again to repeat the course of its flight. But he admits it is not to be conceived that mere mechanical causes could give birth to so many regular motions, and invokes an act of providence in providing each satellite with a tangential push of a strength which, together with the pull of the primary, creates an orbit. General Scholium to Book 3 of the Principia. The inertia of the tangential instantaneous push has not exhausted itself in all the eons, despite the tidal friction between a satellite and its primary, or the sun pulling the satellite away from the primary, or the resistance of matter, meteorites, in space, though all these forces act permanently and therefore with acceleration. Newton's gravitational theory is regarded as proved by the action of the tides. But studying the tides, Newton came to the conclusion that the moon has a mass equal to 1/140th of the Earth. Modern calculations based on the theory of gravitation, but not on the action of the tides, ascribe to the moon a mass equal to 1/81 of the Earth's mass. Is that 1/81st? of the Earth's mass. The greatest triumph of the theory of gravitation was the discovery of the planet Neptune, the position of which was calculated simultaneously by Adams and Leverrier from the perturbations experienced by Uranus. But in the controversy which ensued concerning the priority in announcing the existence of Neptune, it was stressed that neither of the two scholars was the real discoverer, as both of them calculated very erroneously the distance of Neptune from the orbit. Yet even if the computations were correct, there would be no proof that gravitation and not another energy acts between Uranus and Neptune. The gravitational pull decreases as the square of the distance. Electricity and magnetism act in the same way. Newton was mistaken when he ascribed to magnetism a decrease that follows the cube. Building his system of the world, Newton put before his readers rules of reasoning and philosophy. The first rule is, we are to admit no more causes of natural things than such as are both true and sufficient to explain their appearances. Rule 2 is, therefore, to the same natural effects we must, as far as possible, assign the same causes. Thorough theoretical and experimental investigations will be necessary to build a new theory in place of now accepted theory of gravitation. For the present, we shall offer only general suggestions. 1. Attraction between two natural atoms. Each atom is made of positive and negative electricity, and though neutral as a whole, may form an electric dipole when subjected to an electric force. Thus, in the theory presented here, this attraction is not due to inherent gravitational properties of mass, but instead to the well-known electrical properties of attraction. Two dipoles arrange themselves so that the attraction is stronger than their mutual repulsion. Inertia, or the passive property of matter, the equality of active and passive, or gravitational and inertial mass, was in Newton's system a most remarkable accidental coincidence, something like a miracle. Newton himself decidedly felt it as such. W. de Sitter. In Einstein's explanation, inertia and gravitation are not two different properties, but one and the same property viewed from different points in space. Accordingly to his illustration, a man in an elevator that is being continuously pulled up by a rope invisible to the man will feel his feet pressed against the bottom of the elevator and will think that he gravitates toward the floor. But someone else observing the situation from the outside in space will judge that there is a fact of inertia the pulled elevator has to overcome, the inertia of the man standing on its floor. If the man in the elevator lets an object fall from his hand, it will approach the floor at an accelerated speed, because the elevator is being continuously pulled upward. To the observer on the outside, it rises with acceleration. By this illustration, Einstein tried to explain the equivalence of inertia and gravitation. But it is impossible to adopt this explanation for the gravitational effect of the globe. The observer from outside cannot perceive the globe as moving simultaneously in all directions. Einstein sees the difficulty and says, it is, for instance, impossible to choose a body of reference such that, as judged from it, the gravitational field of the Earth in its entirety vanishes. In our explanation, the active property is due to one kind of charge in the atom, the attracted charge, the passive property to the opposite charge, which is repelled. Both exist in equal quantities in a neutral atom. This explains the equality of the gravitating and inertial properties of matter. However, the charges must arrange themselves in such a manner that attraction precedes the attracting force, overcomes the repelling force, because the attracting poles of the dipoles are closer to one another than the repelling poles. When the repelling poles are closer, the atoms, or their combinations in molecules, repel each other, as is the case with gases. A charged body attracts more strongly than a neutral body because of the presence of free electrons. In dipoles, the charges rearrange themselves only a little, but free electrons can rearrange themselves much more. 3. Attraction of bodies toward the Earth. The ionosphere is strongly charged with respect to the neutral Earth. A potential difference of 100 volts per meter altitude exists near the ground, or a difference in potentials which forces the current through the electric lamps. Does any relation exist between the difference in voltage in the lower atmosphere and the difference in weight? At the ceiling of a room 3 meters high, a kilogram weighs about 1 milligram less than at the floor. Altitude, a voltage difference per meter is not the same as near the ground, but it accumulates to a high figure. Between a point 10 miles high and the surface of the Earth, there is an electrical pressure difference of about 150,000 volts. Let me read that again. Between a point 10 miles high and the surface of the Earth, there is an electrical pressure difference of about 150,000 volts. Neutral bodies consist of both positive and negative charges. Neutral atoms form dipoles along the lines of force of the electric field, with poles turned toward the Earth and the ionosphere. Is the fall of objects due to their dipole attraction and to their movement in an electrical field as dipoles? The proximity to the ground gives its action preference over that of the ionosphere, as far as the attracting force is concerned, since the distance between the opposite electric poles of the atomic dipole is much smaller in comparison to its total distance from the ionosphere than from the ground. This means, however, that when the objects reach a certain altitude, they would be attracted upward. Meteorites, repelled into space, are apparently charged identically with the upper layer of the ionosphere. This part of the theory concerning falling bodies requires experimentation and exact calculation. It is probable that, besides carrying a charge, the ground turns all of its atoms as dipoles toward the ionosphere. 4. In contrast to electric and magnetic fields, the gravitational field exhibits a most remarkable property, which is of fundamental importance. Bodies which are moving under the sole influence of a gravitational field receive an acceleration, which does not in the least depend either on the material or the physical state of the body. Einstein. This law is supposed to hold with great accuracy. The velocity of the fall is generally explored with the help of a pendulum. It appears to us that a charged object must fall with a different velocity than a neutral object. This is generally denied, but the denial is based on the observation that there is no difference in the number of swings of a pendulum in a unit of time, in the case where a charged or neutral bob is used. This method may produce inaccurate results. In an accurate method, the falling time and the time of ascent of the pendulum must be measured separately. In the case of a charged body, the increase in the velocity of descent of the pendulum may be accompanied by a decrease in the velocity of ascent, and thus the number of swings in a unit of time would remain the same for charged and non-charged bobs. 3. Attraction, repulsion, and electromagnetic circumduction act in the solar system. Sun, planets, satellite, comets are charged bodies. As charged bodies, they are interdependent. The solar surface is charged negatively in relation to the charge of the Earth, as the spectral lines with the dominant red line in the spectrum of hydrogen reveal. The Sun carries a charge and rotates. It is an electromagnet. The spots of the Sun are magnetic, and the filaments of hydrogen on the Sun's surface arrange themselves as iron particles in a magnetic field. Besides the spots, the Sun as a whole is a magnet. The form of the corona and the motion of the prominences suggest that it is a magnet, wrote G.E. Hale when he undertook to detect the Zeeman effect. The Zeeman effect proved to be most pronounced at 45 degrees. In both hemispheres of the Sun, Hale found the displacement of lines decreases to 0 at the equator and near the poles of rotation. and also that a first approximate value for the vertical intensity of the sun's general field at the poles is 50 Gausses. Thus, it is confirmed that the sun is a magnet. But the magnetic field was found not to be strong. This result is questioned here. The lines of the corona suggested that the existence of a magnetic field on the sun to the scholar who discovered it, but the form of the corona suggests a powerful magnetic field. Visible coronal bands and streamers reach a distance equal to 10 and more diameters from the disk of the sun. Mercury is only 40 solar diameters from the sun, and Earth 108 solar diameters. More recent investigation by Stevens, who photographed the streamers from 25,000 feet, disclosed a globular corona more extensive than any known from ground photographs. Disturbances in filaments and vortices of the sun affect the ionosphere of the Earth and prove the existence of a powerful charge on the sun. Rotating at the speed of the solar rotation, a strong charge must produce a strong magnetic field. A revised investigation of the magnetic power of the field around the sun is here suggested. It should be kept in mind that the observations have been made from the solar magnetic field, in which the Earth is embedded. If our concept is correct, it is possible also that the strongest Zeeman effect will show itself in latitudes higher than 45 degrees. As is well known, the angle of observation must be taken into consideration in observing the Zeeman effect. The sun is a rotating charged body, and it creates a magnetic field. We assume the solar charge to be large enough to produce a magnetic field with lines of force reaching the orbit of Pluto. The charged planets move at right angles to the sun's magnetic lines of force and describe the usual circular motion to which moving charged bodies are subjected in a magnetic field. Satellites, in turn, revolve in smaller magnetic fields produced by the rotation of the charged planets. The non-rotating planets have no satellites, for they do not produce magnetic fields. If there are rotating satellites, they may be able to revolve trabants around them. The origin of the Earth's magnetic field has so far defied all attempts of solution. The cause of the Earth's magnetic field is in 1. The magnetic field of the sun, and 2. The rotation of the charged Earth around its axis. It has been calculated that if the Earth is a magnet because of the rotating charge on its surface, the charge must be so great as to enter as a serious factor in planetary perturbations. We have constructed a theory according to which the members of the solar system are charged bodies. Electric attraction and repulsion and the electromagnetic circumduction act in the system. The origin of the magnetic field around the sun is in its charge. The sun is an electromagnet. Planetary motion is due to the electromagnetic force exerted on the planets by the sun. The planets, as charged bodies, create magnetic fields by their rotation. It follows that A. Gravity, depending on electrical charge, varies with the charge, and B. The masses of the planets are inaccurately calculated. C. The positive and negative charges are manifested only in relation to the charge of the Earth. One of the differences between the concept of celestial mechanism expounded here and the theories of gravitation of Newton and Einstein, that in our understanding the revolution of the moon is a process of a different order from that of the falling of objects near the terrestrial ground. The revolution of the moon is a phenomenon of circumduction of a charge by a magnetic field, and is not a fall combined with inertia. The primary motion of planets and satellites along a straight line is a fallacious notion. At the distance of the moon, the electromagnetic field of the Earth causes circumduction, while in the terrestrial atmosphere, the electric field between the Earth and the ionosphere causes the movement of the dipoles. Like the moon, the Earth and other planets and satellites are subject to electromagnetic circumduction. 4. Universal gravitation is an electromagnetic phenomenon in which the charges in the atoms, the free charges, the magnetic fields of the sun, and the planets play their parts. In the frame of this theory, the following phenomena become explainable. All planets revolve in approximately one plane. They revolve in a plane perpendicular to the lines of force of the sun's magnetic field. 2. Planets have a greater aggregate energy of motion than the Sun. The revolution of the planets did not originate in their angular velocity of rotation of the Sun. The magnetic field of the Sun affected their revolution. Also, the fact that one of the satellites of Mars revolves with an angular speed greater than that of the rotation of this planet is explained here by electromagnetic circumduction. 3. The retrograde revolution of a number of satellites. It is due either to retrograde rotation of the primary with inversed magnetic poles or to a difference of charges. The fact that the retrograde satellites of Jupiter and Saturn are most remote from the primaries poses the problem whether their remoteness from the primaries and their relative closeness to the Sun play a role in their being of a presumably different charge than the other satellites of Jupiter and Saturn. In the case of Uranus, the retrograde revolution of its satellites follows the retrograde rotation of the planet and its magnetic field. One of the magnetic poles of Uranus can be readily investigated because it faces the ecliptic. 4. The rotation of the Earth. The tidal theory fails to account for the rotation of the planets. The position of the magnetic poles of the Earth at a distance of about 20 degrees from the geographical poles may be related to the rotation of the Earth. Once each day, the magnetic poles of the Earth occupy the southernmost and the northernmost positions in the lines of the magnetic field of the Sun. 5. Perturbations among the members of the solar system are actions of attraction as well as of repulsion, and depend on the charges of the planets and satellites and their magnetic properties. The fact that after perturbations the planets resume their normal courses is due to the regulating action of the Sun's magnetic field. Similarly, the satellites are regulated in their motion by the electromagnetic fields of the primaries. 6. The anomalies in the motion of Mercury and other planets. The velocities of revolution of the planets depend on their charges. A strongly charged body is carried across the lines of the magnetic field more swiftly than a weakly charged body. If the charge of a planet increases, the velocity of revolution of such a planet must increase too. Positive as well as negative charges arrive from the Sun in an uninterrupted flow. The planet Mercury moves faster and faster. This must be the result of an increasing charge of the planet. Also, the anomalies in the motion of other inner planets may be attributed to a changing charge. Other irregularities in the motion of the planets can be attributed to the fact that the electrical charge of the Sun is not equally distributed on the solar surface. 7. The deflection of a ray of light passing close to the Sun. Before attributing the deflection to the gravitational field of the Sun, the influence of the magnetic field of the Sun on the rotation of light should be calculated. The influence of the Moon on a ray of light by creating a ripple in the atmosphere during a solar eclipse must not be overlooked. An investigation of the trajectory of a stellar ray passing close to the Moon in a lunar eclipse is suggested here. 8. The repulsion of a comet's tail by the Sun. The head of a comet and its tail are charged under a great potential difference, accounting for the manifest repulsion of the tail and attraction of the head. The neck of the comet is probably composed of positive and negative elements in equal proportion, thus forming a neutral zone between the head and the tail. Under the influence of the temperature in space, the charges change and the comet returns on its orbit. 9. The displacement of meteorites in the higher atmosphere. It is caused not by the winds, but by the electromagnetic effect of the ionosphere. The light of the meteorites is caused by electric discharges. Consequently, the passage of meteorites disturbs radio reception.
Give me some sugar, baby.
10. The influence of the Moon on radio reception. The charged Moon on its hourly stations exerts an attracting, repelling action on the electrified layers of the atmosphere, ionosphere, to a greater degree than the insulating layer of the Earth's atmosphere. 11. The semi-diurnal variations of the barometric pressure. These variations with maxima at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., have their cause in the semi-diurnal changes of the change of the ionosphere at the same hours, 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. The barometric pressure reflects the degree of attraction exerted by the ground and the ionosphere on the gaseous envelope. I have to read that one a couple times too. 12. The defiance of gravity by water and cloud building. The ground and the ionosphere induce the secondary charge layers in the atmosphere. In such a secondary layer, cloud building takes place. Generation of electricity in clouds is due not to the friction of neutral clouds on mountain ridges, or to the friction of neutral clouds among themselves, or to the friction of droplets by the gravitational pull on them, but to the fact that droplets rise already charged toward the charged layer of the atmosphere, and clouds are further subjected to induction by the ground and the ionosphere. This explains also the segregation of the charges in the upper and lower levels of the clouds. 13. Defiance of gravity experienced in the cumulonimbus clouds. This defiance, recorded by airplane pilots, is the result of charges and electromagnetic effects prevailing in these clouds. 14. The direction of the cyclonic and anticyclonic whirls, their direction on the Earth as well as on the Sun, depends on the electromagnetic fields and not the rotation on these bodies. 15. Increased gravity over the sea. The increased gravity over the sea is compared with that over the continent, may be explained by the higher charge of salt water. Yes, salt does seem to cater to a higher charge. There were a few attempts made to unite the electromagnetic and gravitational field theories, but as far as I know, nobody has tried to solve the problem of planetary movement around the sun as a motion of charged bodies in a magnetic field. My explanation implies that the measurement of the solar magnetic field by Hale is not correct. If the sun has a significantly strong magnetic field, so as to reach the farthest of the planets, the quantitative elements are dictated by the charge of the sun, the strength of its magnetic field, and the charge of the planets. The theory of cosmos without gravitation, given here in synopsis, is written also in a comprehensive form, 1941 to 43. I arrived at this concept early in 1941. As a result of my research in the history of cosmic upheavals as they affected the Earth and other members of the solar system. A number of facts proved to me that the Sun, the Earth, and other planets, the satellites, and the comets are charged bodies, that the planets and their satellites have changed their orbits repeatedly and radically, and that gravitational attraction, or the weight of objects, has changed during human history. I thus recognize the fact that not gravitation, but electric attraction and repulsion and electromagnetic circumduction govern the solar system. In construction the electromagnetic theory of the solar system, I am indebted to Miss Shulamith Velikovsky for valuable suggestions on the dipole explanation of attraction between the atoms and the dipole concept of inertia. I've never seen a paradigm change in my life. I don't think there has been one in my lifetime. So we're way overdue. I doubt seriously the gurus of mainstream will ever admit that their life's work is a total failure, because they're going on their own pride and hubris. But eventually they'll be dragged there kicking and screaming, I'm sure. Check out this short bit by Wal Thornhill to show just how screwed up our science is. Recommend watching the whole video. You'll see a link in the description. That'll do it. Take care. I'll see you on down the road.
So we're treated more or less as chemically driven machines. We have become lab rats for the pharmaceutical industry and the medical and food technologists. Far worse, publicly funded research has been corrupted by industry, influencing government and regulators to shut down research into alternative modalities on the basis that they're impossible. Never listen to an expert when they say something is impossible, because they're the last to know when a paradigm shift is about to come. Here's one I took out of a magazine. Talk about misleading. See a difference, GMO corn and non-GMO corn? Neither can science. Well, that says a lot about the blindness of science. It's certainly not an argument for GMO corn, given our limited understanding of living systems and the interconnectedness of everything. Genetic engineering is an experiment with unknown consequences, since it relies on a flawed understanding of genetics. They're only beginning to get involved in epigenetics, that is the changing of the genetic information in a living creature during their lifetime. We have great hulking molecules of DNA with an unknown number of genes that interact with one another in unknown ways under circumstances we don't know. That's terrific. Really gives you confidence, doesn't it? I should point out too that we have less genes than a nematode and less than a grape. This gives you an idea that the morphogenesis of an embryo has more to do with signals from outside, and the DNA is more or less a factory floor, acting under instruction. So all you need in the DNA is the instructions on how to make things, in other words, the coding for the proteins and so on. But what switches them on and off is something that really needs to be investigated. I'll talk more about that later. It assumes a closed system, and as I said, yet epigenetics shows that gene expression is somehow tuned to environmental signals. Science hasn't figured out yet what all of those junk sequences do. When they say junk, it just means I don't understand. Once again, we're treated as lab rats to a whatever cells culture with no thought of the consequences in such an unfathomed ecosystem. Here we go. To know the future, don't ask an expert. And this is Richard Feynman. Learn from science that you must doubt the experts. As a matter of fact, I can also define science another way. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. I mean, when you look at the history, it's dreadful. Ignaz Semmelweis could offer no acceptable scientific explanation for his findings, and some doctors were offended at the suggestion that they should wash their hands between the autopsy room and the delivery room. I mean, you think about it now, it just seems incredible. I would also say that the words debunk and labelling dissidents denier shows the agenda to be unscientific. Debunking is a case of selecting the evidence to suit your argument and ignoring the evidence that doesn't fit. It's the sort of thing that skeptics do. Yeah, it's impossible that washing hands between the autopsy room and the childbirth ward will prevent deaths from puerperal fever. Heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Cold fusion is impossible. I saw a show of hands on a television interview with the experts, and there was one guy who was obviously the alpha male, the dominant one, and he put his hand up and he looked along like this, waiting for the others to put their hands up, and the others sort of, finally put their hands up. So this is how you do science. It's a media show. Of course, homeopathy is impossible, but if you don't understand structured water and Jerry Pollack's work, of course it's impossible. And also, the transfer of information faster than light is impossible, isn't it? And yet the Earth manages to maintain its orbit around the Sun by knowing where the Sun is at this instant, not 8 minutes ago. Future science. Sir Fred Hoyle. The future is a different universe. They do things electrically there in the electric universe. Now, he didn't say that. What he did say is, it's a strange thought, but I believe a correct one, that 20 or 30 pages of ideas and information would be capable of turning the present-day world upside down, or even destroying it. I have often tried to conceive of what those pages might contain, but of course I am a prisoner of the present-day world, just as all of you are. Well, not us. We cannot think outside the particular patterns that our brains are conditioned to, or, to be more accurate, we can only think a very little way outside, and then only if we are very original. That was in his book Of Men and Galaxies. So the electric universe is the path less travelled.
This was the greatest. And let me ask you another question. Is a theory of uniformitarianism, which means that nothing what happened in the past could have happened if it doesn't happen today?
Flush out your kid, you new guy.